Dawn broke over the shattered French countryside on July 18, 1944. The air was heavy with cordite and damp smoke drifting from the hedgerows. Through the haze, a lone Sherman tank stood still among the ruins of a burned-out orchard near the village of Saint-Aignan-de-Cramesnil. Its armor bore the scars of 2 days' fighting, blackened gouges and molten streaks where German shells had glanced off. Inside, the crew was silent, listening to the distant rumble of approaching engines. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and nearly out of hope. Yet at the commander's seat sat Captain Joe Ekins, a 23-year-old tank gunner from Northamptonshire, whose calm eyes belied the chaos around him. In the next 2 hours, he would etch his name into the annals of armored warfare. The battle that morning was part of Operation Goodwood, a massive British offensive east of Caen. Hundreds of tanks had surged forward from the Orne River, aiming to crush the German lines and open the road to Falaise. But the terrain was deceptive. The open fields, hemmed by tall wheat and the occasional stone farmhouse, gave German anti-tank gunners clear fields of fire. Within hours, smoke columns rose across the horizon, Shermans burning where they stood. Radio chatter was a storm of panic and static. The British advance had ground to a halt. Ekins' unit, the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry, had taken position near the village's southern edge. Their orders were simple: hold the line, delay any German counterattack. Intelligence reports hinted that elements of the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, were regrouping nearby. Few realized that among them was the most feared tank commander of the war, Michael Wittmann, the Black Baron of the Waffen-SS, credited with destroying over 100 Allied vehicles. His Tiger I tank was a fortress of steel, nearly invincible from the front. His name alone carried a psychological weight that froze many crews before the first shot was fired. Shortly after 9 a.m., a distant thunder rolled across the fields. The ground trembled. Through binoculars, Ekins saw black shapes emerging from behind a ridge, Tigers, moving slowly, methodically, their turrets scanning. To the British crews, they looked unstoppable. Each 88mm gun could punch through a Sherman's armor at over a mile. Ekins' tank had only a 75mm gun, a weapon that, at this range, might as well have been a slingshot. The odds were obscene: 5 Shermans against 7 Tigers. Yet retreat was not an option. Ekins spoke quietly to his loader, "Cannot. We'll wait for them to crest the ridge. First shot, leftmost Tiger." His tone was steady and rehearsed, like a man reading from a checklist rather than staring death in the face. The gunner adjusted his sight. The loader waited, round in hand. The commander peered through his periscope, heart pounding in rhythm with the grinding treads echoing through the field. Seconds felt eternal, then it happened. The lead Tiger broke the skyline, its massive turret turning toward them. Before the German gunner could aim, Ekins fired. The first shot hit just below the turret ring, a white flash, followed by an eruption of black smoke. The Tiger's hatch flew open, flames shooting skyward. The second shot followed, striking another tank as it maneuvered to flank. The crew could scarcely believe it. 2 Tigers down within minutes. Over the radio, disbelief crackled among nearby units. Reports of German armor burning. But Ekins didn't stop. He moved his sights to a third target, calmly leading the moving silhouette. "On the move," he muttered. The third round struck home. Another explosion. Within the span of 5 minutes, 3 Tigers, the pride of Hitler's armored divisions, were reduced to smoldering wrecks. For the first time, the myth of German invincibility wavered. Unknown to Ekins, one of those destroyed tanks was commanded by Wittmann himself. The German ace, accustomed to domination, had been caught off guard. His Tiger was struck from the flank as it attempted to reposition. Survivors later described a fire so intense that ammunition cooked off inside the turret. When the smoke cleared, the once dreaded name of Wittmann was silent forever. Ekins and his crew, unaware of their victory's significance, kept fighting. German infantry pressed forward, backed by self-propelled guns. The Shermans fired until their barrels glowed red. Around them, the battlefield turned into a furnace. Shells screamed overhead, trees splintered, and dirt and metal showered the tank's hull. The crew's ears rang, their lungs filled with the acrid smell of burning fuel. Still, they held position, each round finding its mark with surgical precision. By noon, the German advance had faltered. The surviving Tigers withdrew under covering smoke. The field before Saint-Aignan was littered with wreckage, twisted steel, shattered optics, and burned-out hulls. British infantry cautiously moved forward, passing the destroyed behemoths that had once terrorized entire divisions. Ekins' tank remained in place, engine idling, as the crew finally allowed themselves to breathe. They had faced the unbeatable and survived. Later, officers from higher command arrived to survey the aftermath. The sheer number of destroyed enemy tanks defied belief. Intelligence officers sketched positions, measured impact angles, and took photographs. Quietly, rumors began to spread among the ranks. A single British gunner had taken out half a dozen German tanks in one morning. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, battlefield myth-making. Others whispered that a new legend had been born. In the days that followed, word reached London. Reports hailed the Sherman hero who had turned the tide at Cannes. But the man himself remained modest. When questioned by his superiors, Ekins downplayed the victory. "We just did our job," he said simply. There was no triumph in his voice, only exhaustion. The faces of fallen comrades haunted his mind far more than the glory of victory. As night fell over Normandy, the air was still heavy with the stench of oil and death. Fires burned on the horizon, their flickering light reflecting off the mangled hulls of what had once been the mightiest tanks in the world. In that eerie glow, one could almost sense the shifting momentum of the war. The invincible image of the German Panzer Corps had been cracked, not by superior numbers, but by nerve, precision, and the calm courage of a young man who refused to break. But what exactly gave Ekins that deadly edge? How could a lightly armed Sherman outshoot the fearsome Tiger I, whose armor was twice as thick and gun twice as powerful? Somewhere behind that miracle of survival lay an unseen factor, a hidden advantage buried in British engineering and battlefield coordination. The answer to that question would reshape the Allies' understanding of armored warfare, and that secret would be revealed only in the next phase of the war, when technology, tactics, and human instinct collided to rewrite the rules of battle. The secret behind Joe Ekins' impossible victory did not lie in sheer luck or divine intervention. It was born from a quiet revolution in British tank warfare, one that fused engineering ingenuity with cold, methodical precision. Long before the battle at Saint-Aignan, military engineers had realized the grim truth. The standard Sherman's 75mm gun was hopelessly outclassed by German armor. In response, they created a weapon that turned the tables, the 17-pounder anti-tank gun. It was longer, faster, and deadlier than anything mounted on an Allied tank at the time. When engineers at the Royal Armament Research Department first tested it, the shell's velocity ripped through 5 inches of steel at over 500 yards. Mounted on a Sherman hull, it became a new breed entirely, the Sherman Firefly. Each Firefly carried fewer rounds, its breech so large that the crew had to store ammunition sideways. But it could destroy a Tiger at twice the range of a regular Sherman. British workshops converted thousands of tanks in secret, often working through the night under blackout conditions. Mechanics improvised, cutting, welding, and rewiring systems not meant to hold such power. In the hands of disciplined gunners, the Firefly turned from a stopgap into a terror. German soldiers quickly learned to identify it by its longer barrel and ordered their troops to prioritize destroying it above all others. Ekins' Sherman was one of those rare Fireflies. Its 17-pounder gun gave him the ability to reach out and strike before the Tigers could bring their 88mm cannons to bear. Yet the weapon alone was not the reason he triumphed. The true key was coordination. Before Operation Goodwood, British armor divisions had refined a new command doctrine, one that emphasized distributed radio control and shared targeting. Instead of relying on rigid orders, tank commanders could now communicate directly across platoons, adjusting positions in real time. Engineers from Wireless Set No. 19 had perfected compact FM radios, allowing clearer voice transmission even under artillery interference. That single technological leap gave crews like Ekins the ability to think and react faster than their enemies. In contrast, German tank units, despite their technical superiority, were often hampered by communication chaos. Many relied on hand signals or limited short-range radios. Reports from captured Panzer officers after the war revealed a consistent frustration. By the time an order reached an advancing Tiger, the battlefield had already changed. In Normandy's hedgerow country, that delay was fatal. A Tiger could destroy a Sherman in one shot, but a Sherman network could outmaneuver a Tiger platoon in minutes. Ekins' crew used that doctrine flawlessly, shifting position, coordinating fields of fire, and staying one step ahead of the enemy. The morning after Wittmann's death, German command ordered a counterattack to reclaim the ground lost near Saint-Aignan. The 2nd Panzer Division moved in, reinforced by fresh armor from the 101st Heavy SS Battalion. What followed became one of the most chaotic tank engagements of the entire Normandy campaign. The British forces dug in, forming overlapping arcs of fire with fireflies at the center. The Germans advanced across open wheat fields, confident their armor could crush whatever stood before them. They underestimated the reach of the British guns at 800 yards. The fireflies opened fire. Their shells streaked across the fields like lightning. Within seconds, 2 Panthers erupted in flame. The German formation hesitated, commanders shouting through crackling radios, trying to locate the unseen threat. The British tanks shifted position after every shot, their engines roaring, treads churning through churned earth and smoke. Ekins' crew methodically picked targets, command tanks first, then stragglers. The gun roared. The loader worked feverishly, sweat pouring down his face as he slammed round after round into the breach. The sound inside the turret was deafening, each recoil shaking the steel walls like thunder. Through the periscope, Ekins saw his round strike true. A Panther tried to reverse, its turret twisting wildly, but a second shot hit its ammunition rack. The explosion lifted the tank off the ground. Another German crew abandoned their vehicle, running for cover as tracer fire cut the air. The battlefield became a deadly rhythm of fire and maneuver, load, aim, shoot, reposition. Coordination over the radio kept them alive. Reports flowed continuously. Target left burning, enemy flanking north. Adjust 20 degrees. It was warfare executed like an orchestra, each tank a note in a deadly symphony. The Germans fought back with brutal efficiency. Their shells tore through hedges and stone walls, sending shards flying. A nearby Sherman burst into flames. Its crew scrambled out, faces blackened with soot. But Ekins did not falter. His loader passed the last armor-piercing round into the breach. "Make it count," he whispered. The gun fired. The shell struck the side of a Tiger that had just appeared at the edge of the field. A moment later, the giant machine stopped moving, smoke pouring from its exhaust. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of fire. By mid-afternoon, the British line held firm. The fields were a graveyard of steel. More than a dozen German tanks lay disabled or destroyed. The British lost several vehicles, but their defense had blunted the counterattack completely. For Ekins, the day blurred into exhaustion. His tank was almost out of ammunition, the barrel worn smooth from repeated firing. Yet, despite the chaos, he had achieved something extraordinary: multiple confirmed kills against superior machines. When the guns finally fell silent, his Firefly stood as one of the few still operational. Reports later compiled by Armored Command revealed staggering data. In just 2 days, British Fireflies accounted for the destruction of over 50 German tanks across a 10-mile sector. The new gun's penetration capacity, combined with superior communication and tactical discipline, had rewritten the balance of armored warfare. Enemy prisoners described the terror of facing a weapon that seemed to strike from invisible ranges. The psychological toll was immense. Some Panzer crews began abandoning vehicles at the first sight of long-barreled Shermans. Behind those victories stood hundreds of engineers, technicians, and factory workers who had made it possible. In Coventry and Birmingham, production lines ran around the clock, assembling the new guns, testing breech mechanisms, and machining armor-piercing rounds with microscopic precision. Every component told a story of trial and failure. Metallurgists learned how to temper the barrel steel to withstand enormous pressures. Electrical engineers redesigned the recoil circuits to stabilize the aiming systems. It was a triumph of industrial resilience, a silent army of minds and hands ensuring that soldiers like Ekins had a fighting chance. Even the Firefly's success had its limits. Its armor was still thin, its mobility constrained by the heavy gun. Every engagement was a gamble between precision and survival. Yet it represented something profound. the ability of ordinary men and engineers to adapt faster than the enemy could react. In those moments of innovation and courage, the tide of the war began to shift irreversibly toward the Allies. When dusk fell over the field south of Cannes, the sky glowed red with the fires of a dozen shattered tanks. Ekins climbed out of his turret, his uniform soaked with oil and sweat, his ears ringing from the concussion of battle. Around him, the remnants of both armies smoldered in silence. What he didn't yet realize was that his actions, and the weapon that made them possible, would become a symbol of Allied ingenuity, the triumph of resourcefulness over raw power. But the real impact of that day extended far beyond Normandy. The victory at Saint-Aignan wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. Across the front, word spread that the Tigers could be beaten, that the British guns could pierce their myth as well as their armor. For the first time, the German crews hesitated. And hesitation, in war, was death. The legacy of that shift would echo far beyond the hedgerows, into the strategy rooms and post-war doctrines of every major power. The true consequences of that revelation, the breaking of the Tiger's aura, would be felt not in one battle, but across an entire continent. In the weeks following the Battle of Saint-Aignan-de-Cramesnil, something began to change across the Western Front. Reports filtering through Allied intelligence revealed a subtle but undeniable shift in German behavior. The once bold and aggressive Panzer thrusts had grown cautious. Tank commanders who had once charged across open ground now hesitated, probing for hidden guns that might lurk beyond the next ridge. The aura of invincibility that had surrounded the Tiger and Panther divisions was beginning to fracture. The psychological tide of war had turned, and it had turned because men like Joe Ekins proved that the impossible could be done. For the Allies, the victory was not merely tactical, it was symbolic. The myth of German superiority in armored warfare had dominated military thinking since 1940. But after Normandy, the Firefly's success forced both sides to confront a new reality. Innovation and adaptability now mattered more than brute strength. Engineers back in England analyzed combat reports, studying impact angles, penetration patterns, and ammunition performance. Within weeks, factories were ordered to increase production of the 17-pounder. Commanders restructured their armored regiments so that every troop included at least one Firefly. What had begun as an emergency improvisation became the cornerstone of British armored doctrine. At the same time, Allied air reconnaissance confirmed the growing desperation within German ranks. Intercepted messages described tank crews requesting thicker frontal armor, side skirts, and smoke dischargers to counter the Firefly's reach. But Germany's war machine was bleeding. Allied bombers were hammering production plants in Kassel, Essen, and Nuremberg. The mighty factories that once produced Tigers and Panthers were now running on fumes, their workers laboring under constant air raid alarms. Logistics, the silent weapon of total war, was crushing the Reich from within. Even when new tanks rolled off assembly lines, fuel shortages and shattered rail networks kept them from reaching the front. Meanwhile, the British and Americans had mastered the art of supply. Convoys crossed the channel daily, bringing spare parts, ammunition, and fresh reinforcements. Field depots repaired damaged Shermans within hours, using interchangeable components. Designed by automotive engineers from Detroit and Birmingham, each tank that rejoined the fight represented a triumph of industrial coordination, a machine reborn to continue the struggle. Behind every victorious commander stood thousands of unseen hands, welders, machinists, draftsmen, and designers whose precision kept the momentum alive. But the victory's impact went beyond machines. It reshaped morale. Soldiers who had once dreaded the sight of a Tiger now spoke of it with grim confidence. In mess tents and trenches, the story of the Firefly gunners circulated like a legend. Crews studied photographs of Wittmann's destroyed Tiger, tracing shell entry points and memorizing weak spots. Every retelling reminded them that even the strongest enemy could fall to patience, skill, and precision. In a war defined by fear, that belief was as valuable as any weapon. Across the lines, German morale was collapsing. Field reports from captured Panzer officers revealed disillusionment. Crews complained of poor coordination, unreliable resupply, and the haunting fear of unseen guns. Some tankers confessed that the roar of Allied aircraft or the flash of long-barreled Shermans triggered panic. Even elite formations like the 12th SS Panzer were no longer immune to doubt. The psychological erosion was spreading faster than any bombardment could achieve. Commanders noticed it in subtle ways: the hesitation to advance, the over-reliance on defensive positions, and the loss of initiative that once defined German tactics. By late summer 1944, the Falaise pocket had closed. The German 7th Army was encircled, and hundreds of tanks were abandoned or destroyed. The Firefly had played a crucial role in sealing that trap. Its long-range firepower shredded retreating columns before they could escape. In aerial photographs, the roads south of Falaise looked like graveyards of steel, Panthers, half-tracks, and fuel trucks smoldering in endless rows. The once mighty Panzer divisions were no longer a spearhead but a broken shell. The legend of the Tiger, so carefully cultivated by Nazi propaganda, lay in ruins among the hedgerows of France. For Ekins, the aftermath of victory was strangely quiet. His name circulated in headquarters reports, but he remained humble, even uncomfortable with the attention. After the war, he returned to civilian life, working in a shoe factory, rarely speaking about the day he became a symbol of defiance. To those who knew him, he was not a hero seeking glory, but a craftsman who had done his duty and moved on. When asked years later how he managed to stay calm under such impossible odds, he gave a simple answer: training. You trust your crew and your gun, and you don't think about anything else. That stoic humility became his legacy, a quiet reflection of all those who fought not for fame, but for survival. Yet his victory left an enduring mark on military thought. Analysts studying post-war armor engagements noted that communication and coordination had outweighed sheer firepower. The success of the Firefly units inspired future doctrines emphasizing information flow as the decisive factor in battle. During the Cold War, NATO planners drew directly from those lessons, developing integrated radio networks and command systems that allowed real-time coordination across vast distances. The principle born in the wheat fields of Normandy evolved into what modern strategists now call network-centric warfare. Even on the technical front, the Firefly's legacy endured. Its 17-pounder gun laid the groundwork for the post-war L7 series, which would arm tanks from the Centurion to the early Abrams models. The lineage of that weapon stretched into conflicts from Korea to the Middle East, a silent thread connecting generations of tank crews who inherited its precision and lethality. Every time a modern tank commander locks onto a target using advanced optics and fire control, they echo the same spirit that guided Ekins that morning: patience, discipline, and trust in technology forged under pressure. In the ruins of post-war Germany, Allied officers toured the wreckage of Tiger tanks, analyzing their design and gathering lessons. They found that even the most formidable machine was only as strong as the system supporting it. The British had proven that adaptability, industrial, tactical, and psychological, was the ultimate weapon. War was no longer about the biggest gun or the thickest armor. It was about the ability to learn faster than the enemy could recover. That realization defined every major conflict that followed. Today, historians still debate the details of that battle, whether Ekins truly destroyed Wittmann's tank, whether it was coincidence or destiny that placed them on the same field. But in the broader story of the war, those details matter less than what the event symbolized. A lone tank crew, armed with an improvised weapon, faced overwhelming odds and won. They shattered the myth of invulnerability and reminded the world that courage, guided by innovation, can rewrite history. As the decades passed, veterans returned to Normandy to stand among the quiet fields where their youth had burned away. The orchards had regrown, the scars of battle softened by time. Yet beneath the soil still lay fragments of steel, mute witnesses to the day when a handful of men changed the course of armored warfare. Visitors walking those grounds often pause at the memorials, reading the etched names and wondering how anyone survived such chaos. The answer lies not in luck, but in resolve. And so, the story of Joe Ekins endures, not as legend, but as truth illuminated by fire. In that moment of hopeless defiance, he proved that even the smallest spark of determination can pierce the darkest armor. His battle was not just a fight for survival. It was a testament to human ingenuity, discipline, and courage under impossible pressure. History remembers many generals, but it is often the quiet soldiers, the engineers, and the craftsmen who shape its outcome. Ekins was one of them. In the words of a veteran who fought beside him, he wasn't fearless, he was steady. And in war, that's rarer than courage.